The college students at Sunrise Cafe thought it was hilarious how the old barista's hands shook when he made their lattes, calling him Shaky Pete and filming his trembling for TikTok. But when a full SWAT team walked through those doors at 2 p.m. and immediately stood at attention while addressing him as Commander Thompson. These social media-obsessed kids were about to learn why some men's hands shake not from weakness, but from the weight of lives they've saved. What these young customers didn't know was that Peter Thompson's shaking hands had once defused over 200 explosive devices in Iraq and Afghanistan, each tremor a reminder of the split-second decisions that kept entire platoons alive. The same hands they mocked for spilling coffee had dismantled bombs that could have leveled city blocks. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe our veterans deserve respect, not mockery, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's special episode reveals how combat trauma hides behind everyday struggles in ways that will change how you see PTSD forever. The morning rush at Sunrise Cafe began at exactly 6:30 a.m. every weekday, when the first wave of college students and young professionals descended upon the small coffee shop near Arizona State University. The familiar sounds filled the air: grinding espresso beans, steaming milk, the constant chatter of customers checking their phones while waiting for their complicated drink orders. Behind the counter, 52-year-old Peter Thompson moved with deliberate precision, his weathered hands carefully measuring coffee grounds and adjusting the espresso machine settings. His graying hair was neatly combed, his black apron spotless despite being only an hour into his shift. To most observers, Peter looked like any other middle-aged man working in food service, unremarkable, invisible, just part of the background. But Peter Thompson carried secrets that weighed more than the heavy espresso machine he operated every day. 15 years earlier, Master Sergeant Peter Thompson had been one of the most respected explosive ordnance disposal specialists in the United States Army. For 3 combat deployments spanning Iraq and Afghanistan, Peter had been the man other soldiers called when death came wrapped in wires, plastic explosives, and timer mechanisms designed by enemies who understood that fear was as powerful as any bomb. His hands, which now trembled slightly when the cafe got busy, had once possessed the steadiest nerves in the military. In Fallujah, Kandahar, and dozens of forward operating bases whose names were classified, Peter had knelt beside improvised explosive devices that could have vaporized city blocks. With tools no more sophisticated than wire cutters and a steady heartbeat, he had dismantled death itself over 200 times. Each successful defusing had saved lives, sometimes dozens of lives. American soldiers, Iraqi civilians, Afghan children playing in streets where insurgents had planted roadside bombs. The mathematics of Peter's service were staggering. Over 2,000 lives preserved by his expertise, his courage, and his willingness to place his body between explosives and innocent people. But that level of responsibility, that intimate relationship with death, changes a man. The human nervous system wasn't designed to function under such extreme pressure for years at a time. Every wire Peter cut, every device he neutralized, every moment spent inches from obliteration left microscopic scars on his psyche. The first signs appeared during his final deployment in 2009. Hypervigilance that made him scan every room for exits. Startled responses to sudden loud noises. Sleep disruption from dreams, filled with clicking timers and red digital displays counting down to 0. What military psychologists clinically termed post-traumatic stress disorder, Peter experienced as a fundamental rewiring of his survival instincts. After receiving an honorable discharge and a chest full of commendations, including the Bronze Star with Valor, Peter returned to civilian life in Phoenix. The transition proved more challenging than any bomb he'd ever faced. Corporate jobs felt meaningless after saving lives. The structured hierarchy he'd known in the military was replaced by office politics he couldn't navigate. Colleagues who complained about minor workplace stress seemed to inhabit a different universe from the one Peter had known, where stress meant the difference between breathing and becoming a crater in the desert. The Department of Veterans Affairs provided counseling, medication, and disability compensation. Peter attended therapy sessions, tried various antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, and participated in group sessions with other combat veterans struggling with similar challenges. Some interventions helped, many didn't. What Peter needed, his therapist, Dr. Maria Santos, explained, was structure without pressure, purpose without the weight of life and death decisions, and work that allowed him to control his environment while contributing to his community. That's how Peter Thompson, former EOD commander, became Pete the barista at Sunrise Cafe. The coffee shop's owner, Rebecca Martinez, was herself a veteran, Army Logistics, Desert Storm. She understood what Peter needed before he fully understood it himself. A job that utilized his attention to detail and precision, but without the stakes that had nearly broken him. Making coffee required the same methodical approach as defusing bombs, but nobody died if he made a mistake. For 2 years, the arrangement worked beautifully. Peter arrived early, prepared the equipment with military precision, and served customers with quiet professionalism. His PTSD symptoms were manageable in the controlled environment. The work gave him purpose without triggering the hypervigilance that had made other jobs impossible. Then, Arizona State University expanded its campus, and Sunrise Cafe found itself in the heart of student territory. The new demographic brought energy, revenue, and something Peter hadn't encountered in his controlled environment: casual cruelty disguised as entertainment. It started with 19-year-old Madison Wells, a communications major with 50,000 TikTok followers who specialized in funny coffee shop content. Madison noticed that the older barista's hands shook when the shop got busy, and his reaction to the espresso machine's occasional backfire, a sharp flinch that made him step backward. "This old guy is so jumpy," she told her friend Chloe while filming. "Watch this." Madison began deliberately ordering complicated drinks during rush periods, recording Peter's increasing anxiety as the pressure mounted. His hands would shake more noticeably, he'd occasionally spill milk or drop cups, and the stress would make his startle reflex more pronounced. "Shaky Pete strikes again" became Madison's running commentary, usually accompanied by laughing emojis and hashtags like #coffeeshop fails and #boomer barista. The videos gained traction. Other students began visiting Sunrise Cafe specifically to witness and record Peter's struggles. They'd slam books on tables to make him jump, order drinks with excessive modifications to increase his stress, and film his reactions for social media content. 20-year-old Jake Morrison, a business major, created a TikTok account called Shaky Pete Chronicles, dedicated entirely to filming Peter's worst moments. The account gained 25,000 followers who commented with laughing emojis and suggestions for new ways to trigger the old guy. "Maybe he's an alcoholic," suggested one comment. "Those shakes look like withdrawal." "Probably just old and weak," added another. "Why do they hire people who can't handle the job?" Peter was aware of the filming, the comments, the deliberate attempts to increase his stress for entertainment. Rebecca offered to ban the students, but Peter declined. He'd faced real enemies who wanted to kill him and everyone around him. He could handle college kids with cameras. But the constant mockery wore on him. The therapeutic progress he'd made began eroding. Sleep problems returned. His medication required adjustment. Dr. Santos increased their session frequency from monthly to weekly. They don't understand what they're seeing, Dr. Santos explained during one particularly difficult session. Your startle response, your hand tremors during stress, your hypervigilance, these aren't weaknesses, Peter. They're evidence of trauma overcome, of a nervous system that kept you alive in impossible situations. I know that intellectually, Peter replied, his hands steady, as always, during their calm conversations. But when that kid points a camera at me and laughs because I flinched when someone dropped a tray, it's hard to remember that I used to disarm bombs. Have you considered telling them about your service, your expertise? Peter shook his head. I didn't serve for recognition. I served to protect people, even people who don't understand what protection cost. The situation reached its peak on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The cafe was packed with students celebrating spring break, the atmosphere loud and chaotic. Madison Wells had organized what she called a Shaky Pete flash mob. 20 students would simultaneously order complex drinks, film the chaos, and create a viral compilation of Peter's stress responses. Peter saw them coming. His trained eye recognized coordination, planning, hostile intent. Every instinct developed over years of combat told him this was an attack, even though his rational mind knew it was just cruel entertainment. The students initially thought the SWAT officers were responding to some kind of emergency. Perhaps someone had called police about the crazy barista who ducked behind the counter. But instead of investigating a disturbance, the officers moved with purpose toward Peter. The lead officer, Commander Michael Torres of the Phoenix Police Department's bomb squad, was a thick-built man in his 40s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions. He'd been monitoring social media posts about Shaky Pete for weeks, growing increasingly concerned about what he was seeing. Commander Torres and his team knew Peter Thompson by reputation. Every bomb disposal technician in Arizona had heard stories about the legendary EOD specialist whose techniques had revolutionized their profession. Peter's innovations in render-safe procedures had become standard training for bomb squads nationwide. More personally, Torres himself had learned explosive ordnance disposal using training protocols Peter had developed. During his own deployment in Iraq, Torres had successfully defused 7 IEDs using methods Peter had pioneered. He quite literally owed his life to the man these students were mocking. "Commander Thompson," Torres said loudly, his voice carrying military authority that immediately silenced the cafe. "Sir, we need to speak with you." The students looked around in confusion. "Commander?" This shaky old barista was some kind of commander. Peter straightened to his full height, muscle memory bringing him to attention despite his civilian clothes. For a moment, the trembling stopped, the hypervigilance focused into professional alertness. "What can I do for you, Commander Torres?" Peter's voice was steady, controlled, carrying an authority the students had never heard before. "Sir, we have a situation downtown. Suspicious package at the federal building. Our EOD team has requested your consultation." Madison Wells looked at her phone. Live stream still running. Audience confused by this unexpected development. Her followers were typing rapid questions. Who is this guy? What's happening? Is the old barista actually important? Torres continued, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Commander Thompson, our newer technicians have been using your render-safe procedures, but we've encountered a device configuration none of us have seen before. We need the expertise of the man who literally wrote the book on explosive ordnance disposal." Peter nodded slowly. "How long do I have to get there?" "Transport is waiting outside, sir. We can brief you en route." Torres turned to address the cafe, his voice carrying the authority of someone who regularly dealt with life-and-death situations. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been in the presence of one of the most decorated bomb disposal specialists in United States military history. Commander Peter Thompson defused over 200 explosive devices during 3 combat deployments, saving thousands of lives. The silence was absolute. Students who had been laughing moments earlier now stared in shock at their phones, their viral videos suddenly revealing themselves as documentation of their own ignorance and cruelty. Torres wasn't finished. The man you've been filming and mocking has skills that police departments nationwide consider legendary. His techniques for approaching unknown explosive devices are taught in every bomb squad academy in America. 3 weeks ago, his procedures helped my team safely neutralize a device that could have leveled a downtown office building. Madison Wells felt her stomach drop as the implications settled in. Her shaky Pete chronicles weren't documenting weakness. They were recording the residual trauma of a man who had repeatedly risked his life to protect others. Jake Morrison quietly stopped his live stream, suddenly aware that his 25,000 followers had been unknowingly participating in the mockery of a genuine American hero. But the most powerful moment came when Officer Jennifer Chen, the youngest member of Torres's team, stepped forward. She was 28 years old, a former Marine who had transitioned to civilian bomb disposal work. "Commander Thompson," she said, her voice carrying both respect and emotion, "I wanted to thank you personally. I am alive today because of techniques you developed. Last year, I encountered an IED in a shopping mall parking lot. Your 3-wire protocol saved my life and prevented mass casualties." Chen paused, looking directly at the students who had been filming. This man's hands shake not because he's weak, but because he's strong enough to carry the weight of every life he saved. Every tremor represents a split-second decision made under pressure none of you could imagine. Peter's eyes filled with tears, not from shame, but from recognition. After years of feeling broken, discarded, defined by his trauma rather than his service, he was being seen for who he really was. Commander Torres checked his watch. "Sir, we need to move. The downtown situation requires your immediate assessment." Peter untied his apron with hands that were now steady. The hypervigilance that made him anxious in the coffee shop was exactly what made him invaluable in high-stakes situations. His startled response, his constant scanning for threats, his obsessive attention to detail, all symptoms of PTSD in civilian life, all crucial advantages when facing explosive devices. "Rebecca," Peter called to his boss, who had watched the entire scene in stunned silence. "I may be late for my shift tomorrow." Rebecca Martinez, Army veteran herself, snapped a perfect salute. "Go save lives, Commander." As Peter walked toward the door with the bomb squad team, the students remained frozen in place. Their viral videos now felt like evidence of their own moral failure. The man they'd targeted for entertainment was walking out to face dangers they couldn't comprehend, using skills they couldn't appreciate, carrying responsibilities they couldn't imagine. Madison Wells looked at her phone, where her live stream had been running throughout the entire encounter. Her 50,000 followers had watched the transformation in real time, from mockery to revelation to shame. Comments flooded in, no longer laughing at Shaky Pete, but expressing respect for Commander Thompson and disgust at the students' behavior. "Turn it off," whispered Chloe, Madison's filming partner. "Just turn it off." But the damage was already done. The videos were archived, the cruelty documented, the lesson recorded for posterity. The bomb disposal call downtown lasted 14 hours. The suspicious package proved to be an actual explosive device, a sophisticated IED that had stumped the local team. Peter's 3 decades of experience, his intuitive understanding of bomber psychology, and his encyclopedic knowledge of explosive device configurations allowed him to develop a render-safe approach that neutralized the threat without incident. News coverage of the successful operation mentioned the consultation of a highly experienced former military EOD specialist. But Peter's name was kept confidential for security reasons. When he returned to Sunrise Cafe the next morning, he found a completely different atmosphere. The students who had previously mocked him now avoided eye contact, their shame palpable. Madison Wells and Jake Morrison had deleted their Shaky Pete content, replacing it with educational posts about PTSD awareness and veteran support. But the most significant change was in Peter himself. The recognition from his professional peers, the validation of his continuing relevance, the reminder that his struggles were connected to his strengths, all of it had restored something essential that had been eroded by months of mockery. His hands still shook during busy periods. He still startled at sudden noises. He still scanned exits and assessed threats with hyper-vigilant intensity. But now he understood these responses not as signs of brokenness, but as evidence of service, sacrifice, and survival. Dr. Santos noticed the change immediately during their next session. "You're sitting differently," she observed, "more upright, more present." Peter nodded. "I remembered something I'd forgotten. My symptoms aren't just trauma. They're also training. The same nervous system that makes me anxious in crowds kept me alive in combat zones. The same hypervigilance that seems excessive in a coffee shop is exactly what I need when facing explosive devices." "And how do you feel about the students now?" Peter considered carefully. "I feel sorry for them. They're so insulated from real danger, real responsibility, real consequence, that they mistake trauma for weakness. They've never been in a situation where their decisions determine whether people live or die." 3 weeks later, Madison Wells approached Peter during a quiet afternoon shift. She'd spent those weeks researching PTSD, veteran suicide rates, and the challenges faced by combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. Her new TikTok content focused on mental health awareness and veteran support. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, her previous confidence replaced by genuine humility, "I owe you an apology. What I did was cruel and ignorant. I'm sorry." Peter looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Madison, right? You want to know something interesting about explosive ordnance disposal?" She nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "The most dangerous bombs aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones that look harmless. IEDs disguised as everyday objects, cell phones, toys, coffee cans. I learned to never assume something was safe just because it looked ordinary." Madison frowned, not understanding the connection. Peter continued, "People are like that too. The most extraordinary individuals often look completely ordinary. The veteran checking your groceries might have pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles. The quiet librarian might be a former CIA analyst. The nervous barista might have saved thousands of lives." "I understand," Madison said softly. "I judged you by your appearance, not your character." "Everyone does that sometimes," Peter replied. "The difference is what you do when you realize your mistake." Madison spent the rest of the semester volunteering with veteran support organizations, using her social media platform to raise awareness about PTSD and combat trauma. Her Shaky Pete Chronicles became a cautionary tale she shared during presentations about cyberbullying and social media responsibility. Jake Morrison took a more direct approach. He approached Peter several weeks later with an unusual request. "Mr. Thompson, I'm changing my major to social work. I want to work with veterans when I graduate. Would you be willing to talk to students about your experiences?" Not the classified stuff, just what it's like to transition from military to civilian life. Peter agreed and began speaking at ASU's veteran support groups. His presentations became popular not just among student veterans, but among civilians seeking to understand the hidden costs of military service. 6 months after the SWAT team incident, Phoenix Police Department officially hired Peter Thompson as a consultant for their bomb squad. His official title was Senior EOD Advisor, and his responsibilities included training new technicians, developing protocols for emerging threats, and providing expert consultation on complex devices. The work was perfect for Peter's skills and psychological needs. It utilized his expertise without placing him in direct danger, provided structure and purpose without overwhelming responsibility, and surrounded him with colleagues who understood and respected his background. But he kept his job at Sunrise Cafe, working mornings before his police department shifts. The coffee shop had become more than employment. It was therapy, community, and a daily reminder that ordinary moments mattered as much as extraordinary ones. The students were different now. They asked about his service, thanked him for his sacrifices, and treated him with the respect he'd earned, but never demanded. Some became regulars who stopped by specifically to chat with him, learning about military life, explosive ordnance disposal, and the challenges of veteran transition. Peter's story spread beyond the coffee shop through social media, but this time the narrative was different. Instead of mockery, the posts expressed admiration. Veterans from across the country reached out, sharing their own stories of hidden service and civilian struggles. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Wounded Warrior Project invited Peter to speak at their annual Phoenix fundraising dinner, where he was introduced not as Shaky Pete, but as Commander Peter Thompson, EOD specialist, Bronze Star recipient, and living example of service beyond self. His speech was simple, direct, and powerful. Warriors don't always look like warriors. Heroes don't always look heroic. The person serving your coffee, checking your groceries, cleaning your office might be carrying invisible wounds from visible service to our country. They might have stories they can't tell, skills they can't use, and trauma they can't forget. He paused, looking out at an audience that included many of the students who had once mocked him. I don't share this for sympathy or special treatment. I share it because understanding changes everything. When you know that someone's trembling hands once dismantled death itself, you see strength instead of weakness. When you understand that someone's anxiety comes from hypervigilance developed in combat zones, you recognize adaptation instead of dysfunction. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Peter Thompson still works at Sunrise Cafe, still startles at sudden noises, still has hands that shake during busy periods. But now he wears his uniform differently, not his apron, but his invisible uniform of service, sacrifice, and survival. The coffee shop has become a gathering place for veterans throughout Phoenix, a safe space where trauma symptoms are understood as service-connected, where hypervigilance is recognized as a survival skill, and where the weight of hidden heroism is shared among those who understand its burden. On the wall behind the counter, Rebecca Martinez hung a simple plaque, in honor of all veterans who continue serving in civilian life, carrying invisible wounds and untold stories of courage. Peter Thompson's name isn't on the plaque, but everyone who enters Sunrise Cafe knows it honors him and the thousands of other veterans whose extraordinary service is hidden behind ordinary jobs, whose trauma symptoms tell stories of uncommon valor, and whose shaking hands once held the lives of countless strangers.